Hello, everyone. My name is Pradeep Naik, and I'm going to be hosting the thematic webinar today. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you because we know that people are joining from different parts of the world, and thank you very much for that. I'm going to start with a few rounds of introduction before we start the talk today. First, I would introduce the B2B Global Partnership. Second, I would introduce the thematic webinar, and then I will introduce our speaker of today. And then we'll move into listening to the talk. So as an introduction to the B2B Global Partnership, which is a transdisciplinary research and knowledge and action network with over 100 partners from Africa, Asia, Canada, and internationally. The goal of the global partnership is to support the small-scale fisheries communities in their transition from vulnerability to viability. And we understand vulnerability and viability not just in an economic sense, but also to represent the political, the cultural, the environmental, ecological, and all other aspects of human life. Our focus is fourfold. We are engaged in co-creation and co-production of knowledge that is essential for the transition from vulnerability to viability. And we do that through case studies, research in different parts of the world, especially in Africa and Asia. We are also engaged in building a repository in the form of an information system, and we will find a lot of synergy of today's talk with that particular piece of work. We are also developing multifaceted capacity that is necessary for the transition. We are attempting to do synthesis and integration of the knowledge, the co-produced knowledge, for governance of small-scale fisheries and knowledge mobilization. The B2B Global Partnership aims to identify the diverse factors, conditions contributing to the vulnerability of small-scale fisheries and engage collaboratively with small-scale fisheries communities and other key NGO and government and university partners to enhance SSF, or small-scale fisheries viability. We're conducting transdisciplinary community-engaged research in 6 countries in Asia that includes Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, and Thailand, and 6 countries in Africa that includes Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. In doing so, the B2B Global Partnership brings people and organizations together across physical, cultural, and disciplinary boundaries through a shared interest in addressing global change impacts on small-scale fisheries. The B2B thematic webinar series for which we have gathered here today is an initiative of the B2B Global Partnership to facilitate and generate high-level discussions on vulnerability and viability themes and topics within the context of small-scale fisheries, but also relevant to other resource communities and coastal communities especially. The goal is to feature academics, government representatives, practitioners, and members of the civil society who have made significant contributions to the theoretical, practical, and policy aspects of small-scale fisheries, both locally and globally. The B2B thematic webinar series takes place on the last Friday of every month, and this month it is slightly, deviation. There is a slight deviation from that because of timing, and it will be so, and it will continue throughout the rest of the year in 2024. The series is available internationally through live stream on YouTube. Details regarding the monthly webinar series, including speakers, topics, and titles, and links to the webinar platform is available on our website, which is www.b2bglobalpartnership.com. Today's webinar is the 10th in the series of B2B thematic webinars planned for the year 2024, and the 46th since January 2021, when we actually started this series. And it is my privilege today to introduce Dr. Priyadarshi Patnaik as our distinguished speaker of the series. Dr. Patnaik is professor and former head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. He is also the former chair of the Rekhi Center of Excellence for the Science of Happiness at the same institute, that is Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur. His work at the center focuses on achieving happiness and well-being for individuals, communities, societies, and organizations. Dr. Patnaik's area of research includes visual culture and communication, emotions and music, happiness studies, and translation studies. His interests include visual art, photography, poetry, translation, and flute making. And he will probably relate to some of that during his talk. Dr. Patnaik is a co-investigator, and I'm very proud to say this, of the V2B Global Partnership. And in his role as a co-investigator, he is also a co-lead of the V2B Information Systems Working Group, where he focuses on the development of the V2B information system. And again, the talk has many relevance probably with that topic today. He's also the lead on a Department of Science and Technology project on renewable energy, where he is focusing on the role of communication for empowerment and sustainability. Dr. Patnaik has more than 80 academic papers in national and international peer-reviewed journals, 17 volumes of academic and creative writing that includes edited volumes, and has published poetry, fiction, photography in international journals. Dr. Patnaik's community engagement is extensive. He is a former member of the advisory committee, Kolkata Museum of Modern Arts, and member of Board of Studies, Kala Bhavan, Vishwa Bharati, KIIT, I'm sorry, and many other universities. He has been teaching and researching for the last 26 years. And during that expansive career, he has supervised more than 20 PhD and master's students. It is my honor to invite Dr. Priyadarshi Patnaik to deliver today's talk for the B2B thematic webinar series 2024 October. And the topic of his talk will be vulnerability, green energy, and viability, a framework of intervention for resilience and sustainability. Thank you very much, Dr. Patnaik, for making the time and speaking to us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Naik. I hope my voice is audible. Thanks for the introduction. And I must apologize that I have made a slight change in the title of my talk. Because if you remember, once we had a discussion and I started working on it, I kept on making some changes, which finally resulted in a slight change or modification in the title. But the theme more or less remains the same. There are a few other declarations I would like to make before I share my screen and start this presentation. I am going to focus on the concepts of vulnerability, viability, and focusing primarily on the concept of resilience within this framework from an outsider's perspective. I wouldn't claim any expertise in the fields of small-scale fisheries or related areas. As Professor Naik pointed out, I have done a little bit of what at least some of my scholars have in the field of information systems. So let me share my screen and just give me a moment. I hope my screen is visible. Just wanted to check if the screen is visible. Okay, good.
Screen is visible. Looks good.
So there is a slight modification in the title. So I'm focusing on intervention through resilience for transitioning from vulnerability to viability. And in that context, I will focus the lens a little on concepts of green energy and technology intervention, because that is the area where I have done a little bit of field work with my team and with a team of scholars and faculty members. In coastal Odisha, and certain parts of West Bengal and other parts of India. So these are the areas that I want to cover. I'll first talk a little about the concept of resilience, the way I understand it. Then the concepts of vulnerability and viability. And then I would like to, make a conceptual attempt to link the concept of resilience to vulnerability and viability, to which I will go back when I finally summarize the discussion. Then I'll take up two cases from green energy, where we have worked in coastal Odisha. I'll take up two small cases from technology intervention or information system related intervention, again in coastal Odisha and in West Bengal, one of them under V2V, and then try to summarize the lessons that I've learned, the insights, if you might call them that I have been able to gather. So what is resilience? What do we mean by resilience? Becomes a very important question. There are many definitions. In fact, I will come to that in a moment. But essentially, it is the ability to function or maintain adaptive functioning in response to change, and especially negative change. Something which disruptive change. It also implies the ability to spring back, bounce back, absorb back to the original state, to a near original state, or even a better or a different state, which is nonetheless a positive state, which bring in the concepts of degrees into the, the features of degrees into the concept of resilience, and variety deviations into the concept of resilience. Interestingly, resilience is a concept which pervades the whole range of disciplines. In psychology, it is used. In the context of communities, it is used. In the context of ecology, it is used, infrastructure, and a number of economic resilience, and a number of different areas, related areas, where resilience is used as a concept. However, although when I propose a framework, that framework will cover a whole set of areas that are relevant in the context of V2V, here I'm, as an example, focusing on a little bit on psychological, community, and ecological resiliences. So in psychological context, it also talks about return to pre-crisis status in the community, sustained ability to use resources, respond, recover, and ecology, absorb, recover, adopt, transform in infrastructure and various other areas. These definitions vary to a certain extent. I'll talk a little about that. But then there are significant degrees of commonalities or convergence, although the contexts are different. So when you start looking at the various features of resilience, especially in the context of psychological resilience, community resilience, and mostly in response to disasters, that the literature is plentifully available, we have certain properties of resilience which are highlighted. And these properties become relevant because what I'm trying to propose is that when we talk about resilience in the context of vulnerability and viability and the way they're linked to these properties will become significant. We have the property of robustness, ability to withstand, redundancy, ability to absorb to a certain extent before the system breaks down or bends, resourcefulness or flexibility, ability to analyze, identify, find creative ways to solve crisis, rapidity, how fast or how slow you are able to recover once the damage has been done, risk sensitivity, so ability to evolve, transform, and also ability to understand the risk that is involved, and regenerate, the capacity, even if there are devastations, even if there are changes to the negative, to come back from there, and how quickly, in which particular ways you are able to rebuild yourself. These are some of the important concepts of resilience we come across. And then, of course, we have a few others which we discuss. And these happen to be uh, related to certain areas like flexibility and inclusive properties as well. So when we are looking at it at a first glance, it tells us that if we try to sum up what we are talking about, resilience is not a very simple concept. Uh, it is a pan-disciplinary concept, and it's a concept which includes at least 6 to 8 relevant properties. And those are some of the ways that resilience manifests itself. And two of the properties which come out as very significant, I've just given you a kind of a tabular analysis as just an example, is that there can be degrees or intensities, and there can be qualitative differences. So you can have redundancy, high redundancy, low redundancy, rapid response or slow response, uh, or quick regeneration, slow regeneration. You can also have regeneration of different kinds, that is qualitatively different, risk sensitivity response to that in different ways, resourcefulness of different kinds, robustness based on different elements that we will talk about in a few minutes from now. So what this raises are questions that of what's the relationship of resilience to vulnerability, and what's the relationship of resilience to viability. So let's have a quick look at the vulnerability and viability literature. And we find that within the V2V framework, some of the publications talk about vulnerability in terms of exposure, sensitivity, and response, that is change, response to change to threats, mostly negative. And a susceptible, and vulnerabilities are susceptible to drivers of change or disturbance, and having a limited capacity to cope. So vulnerable is under threat, and for these reasons that we talk about. Vulnerabilities can also, very much like the resilience components we talked about of various kinds, like physical, mental, and especially if you're looking within the framework of V2V, we can give examples of physical or mental vulnerability in terms of malnutrition, disease, trauma, and happiness. They can be natural, sea level rise, saltwater concentration, cyclones, disasters, occupational, where you might be doing juvenile fish harvesting, or there are changes in technology, which we found in silica. Societal changes like change in birth rate, consumption, migration, conflict, economic, governance, emerging issues like COVID, gender, uh, which we faced, and gender, which is something which we're facing. But what is the third element I would like to bring in is the interconnectedness. So a little earlier, when we were talking about resiliences, we were talking about degrees and degrees and or intensity and qualitative differences. When we are talking about vulnerability, something which both resilience and vulnerability share also are degrees and variability. But the third element is the interconnectedness. So the drivers are interconnected. It is not that they are parallelly moving. There is a strong relationship amongst them. And that is something which we will look at when we look at the case studies. So a disaster can lead to a collapse on all fronts. So when we are talking about vulnerability, there can be also ways of looking at stages where vulnerability is at the level of threat. So you are threatened, there is a breach where there is a partial degree of compromise, and overtaken where vulnerability has given way to a total collapse of the system. So the system can be threatened, can be breached, but still be functional or be totally overcome. So these are some of the other elements about vulnerability that we identify. On the other hand, when we are talking about viability, viability is that which makes it possible to transition from a state of vulnerability. So again, from the perspective of V2V, a definition would be the ability to navigate, adapt, transform, and build resilience for unexpected circumstances. So at a level of economic, social, political, ecological, community, and so on and so forth. And in this definition, in V2V, resilience also figures, and my focus is going to be on emphasizing the significance of resilience. So to sum up, we can say that viability of overcoming vulnerability can happen at the level of prevention, where the threat cannot take place. It can happen at the level of protection, where attempts are made, but you are able to refute, or it can happen at the level of repair, where damage has already been done, but you are able to regenerate. So when we are talking about the relationship between vulnerability and viability, I must say that one of the possible ways that this transformation can take place through certain drivers or mediating variables, if we might say so, could be external agencies, but they could be also the internal resources, the capacities that that resilience is able to generate. I went through quite a little bit of literature where certain, I would say, models have been generated, but I intentionally looked at them only after I had developed this conceptual framework. Because very often when you don't see what people have done before you, you come up with ideas which might be slightly different and might be meaningful. So I will share some of these as we go ahead. Although I'm well aware that this is an area where a lot of work has already been done. So when we are talking about resilience, so we talked about the three separately, but when we are talking about them together, we have vulnerability on one end, we have viability at the other end. And there can be changes from outside. What do we mean by changes from outside? Externally imposed changes could be policies, could be certain market regulations which are externally imposed and things like that. Or they could be certain things which are internalized or made a part of specific systems over a particular period of time. So once that happens, we are talking about resilience. So resilience is something which is within the system. And this can happen in two different ways. The resilience that we are talking about, that I am resilient, could happen because if I'm talking from the perspective of, it's a psychological resilience, which would probably be most easy to understand, then I might say that there is a crisis and I'm able to overcome the crisis, manage the crisis, and fight back. And this can happen in two different ways. My personality, my inner core strengths, my upbringing may have prepared me for certain crisis. I would say that these are inherent properties of a system, in this case, I being the system, which make me resilient. The other possible way that I can be resilient, especially in a psychological perspective, is that I've been trained, I have gone through certain interventions, I've learned certain techniques, I have been counseled in certain ways, which make me capable of adjusting to the situation. So when this kind of a change takes place, the change comes from outside, but it is at a particular point of time internalized. And that's why I'm differentiating between the outside forces, which can lead from vulnerability to viability, and resilience, which, whether it is inherent or adaptive, is something which is a part of the system at a given point of time. When we're talking about resilience, is because we highlighted right at the beginning that we'll just focus on three, just to give an example. When we define psychological resilience, we are talking about mental processes and behaviors, emotions, and there can be responses of either anger, aggression, overwhelmed, totally devastated, or I feel the emotions, I control my emotions, I regulate my emotions, I handle my emotions, and I overcome the situation, which is what resilience is all about. And then I bounce back, have the ability to recover from a negative state. In the context of communities, the sustained ability to use available resources to respond, withstand, recover from a crisis, very similar uh, to the mental or the psychological resilience that we are talking about in certain ways. So it could be from issues related to economics, infrastructure, ecology, even community level relationships. And it can operate through intrinsic factors like values, norms, attitudes, or extrinsic factors like configuration, collaboration, planning, action, which can be learned. So I again go back to this point I made between inherent and adaptive, whereas inherent would talk about values, norms, and attributes. Adaptive could be configurations, collaborations, planning, and actions, which are incorporated, learned, and then become a part of the system. Now, we are told that resilience operates in different ways in different systems. I'll talk a little about that. But when we come to ecological resilience, the capacity of an ecosystem to respond to disturbances, to resist damage or to recover from it is the general definition. There, 4 points become very significant. The latitude, the maximum amount of change, okay, the redundancy that the system has, a resistance to change, how difficult it is to breach the walls, precariousness, how close to the threshold are we at a particular given point of time. For instance, right now, in a situation of environmental crisis, we are precariously close to the threshold when we are coming to the ecological components. And we have to find out the different ecological components, how much ability they have to withstand in terms of latitude and resistance because they are close to the threshold. So you find that these concepts, these features keep on getting linked with one another. One affects the other. For instance, the degree of closeness to the threshold would also get reflected in resistance and latitude that we are talking about. And then panarchy, which allows for understanding the system having different levels, hierarchical levels, and the ability of one level to influence the other level. Interestingly, when we are talking about psychological resilience, we are not talking about these hierarchical levels, although we might be able to construct such a concept if we wish to. Okay. Now you see that when we are talking about drivers of change in the ecological context, what is important is that humans can help support ecological resilience. But the important thing is that other kinds of resiliences, like here, let's say resilience created, let's say through green energy technologies or information systems, even these kinds of resiliences which have other primary objectives might be also useful in aiding and assisting ecological resilience. And that is the point I am trying to make in my case studies. Now you see that there is a lot of literature on vulnerability, resilience, how they are used in natural sciences, social sciences. And yet, given the reading that I have done, I have pretty convinced that these these concepts across the different kinds of domains can be used with a certain degree of intelligibility, although there might be differences in the way that they are used in different contexts. So you have literature tells us that we have we can create social resilience wheels or ecological resilience wheels. So you have certain determinants of resilience and the attributes which can make one resilient. So when I started looking at this literature, and which is from Alderens et al. 2016, and started trying to relate it to the V2V framework, I found that, well, there are a lot of areas where we have social or, let's say, collective resilience, okay, that we are talking about. Okay, we talked a little about community, collective, social resilience. And you have some of them which have been highlighted in bold, which can be related to either green energy interventions or technology interventions. So what I'm trying to tell here is that within the V2V, vulnerability to viability framework, when we are talking about resiliences, apart from the intrinsic resiliences that each of the domains have, it is possible to introduce certain changes, drivers of change, which can lead to generation of new kinds of resiliences. And when we talk about green technology, or green energy, or when we talk about energy, uh, technology interventions, we are talking about these kinds of changes. So in the context of ecological resilience, here is again another framework where we found that uh, redundancy, robustness, diversification, abundance are factors which to a certain extent can be generated through other kinds of resiliences, which are introduced to, let's say, human systems and at various levels, and they can influence and affect the resilience at the ecological level. In other words, different kinds of resiliences, whether we are talking about psychological resilience, community or social, community resilience, social resilience, or ecological resilience, they are interlinked with one another. A point I wanted to make right at the beginning. So I'm trying to illustrate it to a certain extent over here. So to sum up my understanding of resiliences of various kinds and their relationships, I was able to identify that resilience can be considered under the concept of hierarchy or magnitude or scale, where if you are looking at the three examples that we took, psychological resilience is small relatively because it concentrates on the individual. Community resilience, when we are talking, the scale is larger. Ecological resilience is a global scale. It can be also looked at from the perspective of who impacts whom, to what extent. So psychological resilience is affected by community resilience, is affected by ecological resilience. It is at the center. Who we are, how we respond to threats of all kinds, to a very great extent, are determined by our own core strengths, but they are also to a very great extent influenced by the societal factors, as well as, of course, not discussed economic and other factors, infrastructure factors. And then, of course, the ecological environmental challenges that we face. And then when we're talking about degrees of influence, we realize that environmental changes significantly affect community level changes and psychological individual crisis. So when we are talking about a disaster, a climate disaster like a cyclone, it not only affects itself, the environment kind of reacts in a way that it manages to affect itself. It also affects the community and the individual significantly. All right. On the other hand, if you're looking at the community is able to affect the individual significantly. However, the individual is very moderately able to influence the community and hardly ever the environment. But the community maybe, or the whole mankind, if they form organized units, may be able to influence and should be able to influence environmental changes in a significant degree. So these kinds of relationships emerge when we are talking about the concept of resilience uh, uh, in terms of the various levels as well as the various domains in which resilience operates. So one might ask this question that why are we talking about this? We are talking about this because we find that the whole ecosystem of resilience, if we talk about it, has various domains. They operate in various different ways. They influence one another in various different ways. And an ability to understand this is central to developing intervention strategies. So that's basically what we're looking at. So the viability, if you're moving in the direction of viability, these probably need to be taken into consideration. So I'll quickly cover the four cases that we were talking about, because to the best of my understanding, I understand that I might need to wrap up in the next 15 minutes or so. Greener sustainable energy need not be explained. Solar energy, again, need not be explained. Off-grid small units is what we work with. And I'll give you a few examples of that. And When we're talking about technology interventions, they can be of various kinds, but we'll be primarily focusing on information systems in two different projects that we work with and the little understanding that we have been able to generate in the process. Okay. So the question is that, can green energy and technology intervention be drivers of resilience? I have a feeling that yes. And this is what I'm trying to kind of illustrate through the next few slides. So what I'm trying to say, and what I've kind of elaborated already, is that resilience is an intrinsic property of a system or an individual as a system, but it is that at a given point of time. In other words, those properties can be recharged, acquired, created through external interventions. And that is why technology and green energy interventions, when they're introduced, are external agencies. But when they're incorporated into the systems and retained there after the external intervention is withdrawn, they become a part of the resilient system, or they contribute to the resilience of the system. So that's all I will try to point out right now. Let me come to my cases. In 2018, we did a project where Government of India wanted to assess the installation of 45,000 small microsolar units across 13 Indian states, which was supposed to affect more than 2 lakh people. So what did we do? There was this microsolar dome. I will not go into the details of it. It is an installation in thatched kacha houses in India. And it's the indoor lighting solution, which is a day and night solution. You can see the glass over here. It jets out of the roof. So during the daytime, it takes in light, because in many rural houses, there are hardly any windows. So you have the external light coming in. And even during light, because there are also solar panels attached to this, it stores energy in its battery and is able to give you light during the night. It also could be fitted with small exhaust fans for kitchens, small 1 watt LED lights for children to read in. We did these experiments. Or we could create disaster management kits. I'll talk a little about the disaster management kit, which is the center of interest over here. The first set of kits that we created for the Chilika fishing community was for the ambulatory fishing community. What happened with this fishing community was that these people spent 15 to 20 days either in the water or in the coast. So next to the water. So they would maybe go into the lagoon for a couple of days or 2 days and then come back to the shore. They would not go home because their village is maybe 5 kilometers away. But they would stay at the shore and they would do their regular activities, maybe say sailing and other things. And again, from there, they would go into the sea again or the lagoon again. So the challenges was lighting on sea, lighting on source at night because there was no light, mobile charging because there were no electricity anywhere nearby, lack of recreation. And we wanted to devise something which would cater to the minimum energy needs. So we had a solar panel and 2 LED lamps. I'm sorry for the typo. A rechargeable battery for storage and an FM radio with micro SD card. So the radio, once you enter the lagoon or the sea, is something which is not operable. FM radio doesn't work beyond a particular point, but you can listen to songs and things like that, which you store in your micro SD card. All right. And we found that we distributed to around 60 to 100 fishing boats, and they were actually able to use it very meaningfully for recharging their mobiles, for communication, disaster information when on the coast, if they're planning to go out, because the FM radio is working over there. Other types of information related to livelihood at the coast, light for cooking on the coast or at sea, music and audio recreation through FM radio. And so these were the various things they were capable of doing when they were able to use the system. The second one that we created was for the disaster management kit for coastal communities. One thing we remember that in Bhubaneswar, when the cyclone Fani struck, most of the entire grid electricity was knocked off for 7 days. And when we went there and visited the places where we had distributed the microsolar dome, they proudly told us that when the disaster struck, they removed the microsolar dome from their roofs, they kept it with them, and they were the first people to be able to charge their mobile batteries because the others had no power for anything between 7 to 15 days. So we developed it. Uh, we had an FM radio set for a local specific channel, so that could not be changed. Solar panels and rechargeable battery, the functionalities were more or less the same, but they were fixed to the roofs of the buildings. The idea was that although many households in the villages have smartphones, the smartphones are with the younger generation, they carry it outside. So if there is a disaster news or a disaster alarm or whatever, these people are not in a the people, and especially the women folk in the houses have no access to it. So this was a strategy which we have developed so that the community members, even those who are staying inside and do not have access to information, would have access to information. So if you're talking about the resilience drivers and how it influences at different levels, you can say that the drivers here are information lighting, support for information technology. And at the individual level, it gives you a sense of security. At night, you are able to use the torch and navigate. It gives you connectivity with other community members and small scale empowerments of this kind, like being able to cook without a kerosene lamp, without using that, not polluting, and women folk being able to use it. So maybe gender empowerment. At a community level, it provided access to networking, knowledge sharing, planning, and responses, which could be done. At an ecological level, it helps reduce green energy and reduce pollution and supports redundancy and abundance in terms of the energy that we use primarily, and maybe a degree of awareness which might stop us polluting the planet further. So there was, in terms of resiliences, certain elements. So these were the external forces that were operated, but these were the resiliences which were created. And even when you take it away, maybe they would acquire their own system if they find it worthwhile. And then they would continue to have these facilities available to them because they are economically viable, very low cost solutions, something like maybe 30 to 40, 30 pounds or $30 or $40 for the entire system. Now, coming to information technology, what I'm trying to share with you is that, again, in the context of the microsolar dome, I will not take you through the table because of the shortage of time. What if we found was that we needed to connect the beneficiaries, the NGOs and manufacturers. We needed to network them through apps and through an information system where anything went wrong with the microsolar domes, they would be able to inform. The NGOs will be able to connect with them to find out state of affairs. They might be able to connect with the manufacturers to find out what else is required. And so there is a networking that we were able to create, at least as a prototype, and we were able to test it with a few hundred people in the local communities with the app. So I will again quickly go through the features, the network availability, virtuality, transparency, non-hierarchical. If they had some innovations, those could be shared. They were empowered in the sense that without traveling, especially during the COVID-19, they had the access to other people remotely. So these were some of the features of the system that we were able to generate. The second example that I would like to give is the current V2V system that we are still working on. So one of our scholars, Professor Simran Singh's scholars, is working on focusing on the how to empower small-scale fisheries through information systems. And the feedbacks he received from our work in West Bengal, especially in the Sundarbans, was that participatory design, active user participation, understanding the hierarchy of needs, taking into account the perception and expectations and the decisions of the people, and providing empowerment potential. These were the requirements of the information system when we went for a ground level survey. And the understanding that it gives us is that it's a co-design thing, obviously, because we are co-creating this entire system based on the feedback of the people, maybe on the basis of the user feedback. And usability, ergonomics, and other factors. The other one is a work again in progress, but in a slightly different area where the focus is on social empowerment. And this takes into consideration accessibility and inclusion, that is feedback, user behavior, these things are taken into consideration. Highlight emphasizing digital literacy like ergonomics, digital prompts and notifications so that people who are not comfortable with information system also are in a position to use information system. Community building through networking, nudging, which can be inbuilt into the system, and taking into consideration ethical issues like ethical design, non-hierarchical structures, and bringing in a transparency into what we are doing. And when we worked on these systems, the findings in terms of the relevance to the context of resilience was that these were, I mean, I've already talked about resilience drivers, individual, community, and ecological in the context of green energy. In the context of technology, you find technology for information, for participation, for knowledge sharing. And you find that at the individual level, warning, information, connectivity, planning, response, preparedness, resource utilization, these resiliences or empowerment for resiliences are built in. Linkage, decentralization, social networking, planning, response, social innovations linked into connectivity. And awareness and knowledge of the people about the crisis that we are facing, ecological crisis that we are facing, can indirectly lead to less pollution, redundancy, abundance, and diversity if people respond to this in a sensitive way. So if we go back to the earlier schema that we had created, individual and community level influences are very strongly linked. Affecting ecological resilience is very weak, but nonetheless, it is something which is possible. Having said that, I would just kind of sum up, because I think I should be wrapping up in the next 3-4 days, is that the case studies that I've said of green energy and information systems suggest that even apparently remote factors can have strong contribution in creating resilience. Because when we are talking about the V2V framework, the other direct things like policies, fish market, and other areas are very strongly considered to be relevant. On the other hand, when we are talking about examples of information technology and green energy, they are remote. And yet we find that these also help build up resiliences of certain kinds. So the different domains are linked, and they do manage to impact one another directly and indirectly in various ways. So the 3 instances I took was basically for that reason. Now, if you're looking at the resilience lens and the steps that we find in terms of how we execute it, it's very important to identify variables. For instance, through these case studies, we did identify some variables. And identifying the vulnerabilities, changes that make one vulnerable, identifying resiliences of interests. So through these case studies, we found certain resiliences of interest, identifying the most apt strategies for introduction or generating them within specific contexts, because different contexts could mean they're being introduced in different ways, and assess the impact and identify the most viable optimal solution. So that is where we are moving in the direction of viability. So what I'm trying to reiterate again and again is that vulnerability to viability, resilience is a very, very powerful tool. And all other interventions indirectly also move in the direction of resilience building if appropriately used. So to sum up the points that I had made, often my understanding at the end of the day, when I'm looking at the entire thing, is that resilience and vulnerability can be looked at from the perspective of the analogy of a single coin having 2 faces. Although there are people and there are theories which say that there are significant differences amongst them. I have referred to some of them in the citation section. And the point I have made again and again is that resilience is one of the most relevant possible interventions. for moving from vulnerability to viability. And it's more robust than external intervention because when external interventions are taken away, the system can again collapse until or unless it takes in some of the properties of the external interventions and internalizes them. So when we are looking at the resilient system, you can move from sustainable to self-sustainable because the system doesn't have to depend on the outside factors. From ability to generate, where the introduction of the generative strategies from outside to regenerative strategies, from organizing to the ability to reorganize, organizing within the system, and the ability to creatively, innovatively, iteratively reorganize within the system. These hold the transformative potentials of the, the concept of resilience, and that is why it is relevant to us. Finally, I would like to sum up by kind of creating a schema where I started making a list of the important things that we had talked about. So let us take the example of a cyclone, which is a change in state. Because the moment there is a change in state which affects a system negatively, we have the concept of vulnerability. So we are talking about a change of state. And these are some examples of systems which have been documented in many of the V2V papers. And what are the vulnerabilities or resiliences? They are not to be distinguished. They cannot really be distinguished. You have the property of robustness, redundancy, resourcefulness, rapidity, risk sensitivity, regenerativity, or flexibility. If the variable of robustness is low, then you have vulnerability. If the variable of robustness is high, then you have resilience. So the properties are the same, but the state of the properties, which were influenced by the variables, will decide whether something is vulnerable or resilient. The same applies to redundancy. In the same way, inherent or adaptive, whether the robustness is inherent to a particular system or it is adaptive, that would decide the degree of vulnerability or resilience. Or relationship amongst the factors. So the different factors that are identified here, how they're linked to one another, how they're connected for a specific system, would also decide how strong that entire system is. And so if there is a shift in positive direction in the configuration of this central box that we see over here, then that leads in the direction of viability. So at the end, this is the points I had summed up a little earlier, so I will not elaborate it any further. But it is very important to actually take up small case studies, plan out in detail, look at specific domains, look at the relevant factors for that, look at these intervention strategies that we're creating, see the different kinds of relationships that they have amongst themselves, a matrix, and find out to what extent it is working. Because resources are always to be optimized. Resources are limited. So if we find out the degrees to which different factors contribute to resilience, appropriate strategies for the optimal use of resources as interventions can be used. So this is all I wanted to share with you. These are my references and my acknowledgement to the Microsolar Dome team, where some of their work has been cited. Simran, Ilham, Pallavi, and Diganta from V2V2 team, from whose work also I have cited some of the things that I'm sharing with you here. So that brings me to the end of my session over here. Thank you for this opportunity, for sharing a few ideas, reflections rather. And I don't know how they're relevant, they are meaningful, they might be, but here they are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patnaik. That was really, novel area for us, because I know there are many parallels or many connections we establish, between concepts relating to vulnerability and viability, but the technology piece is, somewhat, not very well discussed, so the link that you were trying to establish in terms of, how resilience and technology are connected through the two projects that case studies that you shared with us, the information system and the solar dome. provide some kind of, ideas about, engaging in the B2B transitions work through the medium of technology, or technology, and its relevance to building resilience and viability in small scale fisheries communities. So we have a few minutes, 15 minutes or so for questions. Um, I have one question from Dr. Bala Niku from the Thompson River University in Canada. And Bala is asking, access to these technologies is dependent on the class, gender, and political resources. Have you thought about how to make access to these technologies universal in your framework? And then he says, thank you, Professor Patnaik, for this thought-provoking presentation.
Thank you very much, Balaji. Uh, did we meet during our last, I don't know, WhatsApp that we had in Chilika? I
Yeah.
think we met. So, hi. Well, the way I would like to respond is that it is this generalizability which is problematic. Uh, are we in a position to, we can have a set of factors and we can look at their permutation combination. So in this, I talked about three factors, the psychological at the individual level, the community, social level, and then we talked about the ecological level, just as as examples. But as you have rightly pointed out, there are economic factors, there are political factors, there are policy factors. They have to be brought in, and they are unique for each of the contexts. So within those contexts, we have to bring in those factors and then try to find out the most appropriate solution within that framework. So you have to make tailor-made solutions. And in terms of generalizability, we might have a format that, like I proposed a format. Many other people might have proposed formats. But the way that the different components of the format uh, influence one another, relate to one another is going to be variable. And based on that, for each of the communities, the, 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 the system has to be made unique. We have experienced that. For instance, the needs of the Chilika fishing community are very different from the needs of many of the communities, let's say in Africa. We had those discussions and we realized that we had to make need-based information systems. There are linguistic differences. What they are accessing through, yes, everybody is accessing through smartphone. There are certain degree of commonalities. So if you're going for a let's say pan-continental or pan-country survey, you find some of these commonalities. But there are also differences which need to be taken into consideration. Linguistic differences, cultural differences, ethicalities, modalities, political interventions, policies. So those would play a significant role in how these systems are developed.
Thank you. And there is a follow-up from Bala again, so in other words, if we are able to facilitate the co-production of ethno-scientific knowledge technologies leading to transformative resilience, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's more of an observation, I understand. But yes, that potential does exist. Thank you.
Okay. Um, so I have one or two areas that I would like to discuss a little bit more, Priyadarshi.
Sure.
And in the meantime, we'll have more questions probably from the online viewers. So I am really interested in listening a little more about the connection you drew between viability or resilience and technology itself. If you can make a little bit of clarification in terms of, is it two-way or is it just one way that technology leads to resilience? But, in your some of the discussions, it was evident that, as resilience can, contribute to better technology, vice versa, the technology can lead to resilience. How do you contextualize that in small communities, like small
I'll give
scale
you a small
fisheries?
example. When we were doing the microsolar dome project in West Bengal, we, after 18 months of intervention, we revisited one of the villages. And there where we suddenly found that there were a couple of medium scale solar panels which the people had brought and installed on their own. So this was a government of India uh, uh, project where we were distributing the microsolar domes, which I said cost us something like maybe $50 freely to the uh, uh, I mean, communities which were deprived communities. But then we found that some of these people gained from this microsolar experience, gained confidence and invested to the tune of maybe 800 to $1,000,
Mm.
okay, to build their own systems. So this was in certain ways transformative. So we injected a system, but the idea is that the system, at least in some cases, starts becoming a part, it's internalized. So we've found this mechanism. And that is also a response to your question in the sense that that again strengthens the technology resilience or technology or acceptance of technology by the community, and using the community on their using the technology on their own, this kind of a bonding stronger. And this makes this external factor part of their internal system, and that community becomes that household at least becomes resilient in terms of power.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in the process, it is affecting uh, the fact that ecology is affected because he's stopped using fossil fuel. He's probably going off grid now, or depending to a certain extent less on
Mhm.
fossil fuel, and so that it's influencing indirectly the ecology. So these kinds of relationships emerge when you actually look at some of the case studies from the ground.
Yeah, and it becomes a kind of, a conduit for, more innovations, based on what they have preliminarily got, And the second connection you also established is between empowerment and resilience. Again, I believe that it is a two-way process in itself. So is the construct that technology leads to empowerment and therefore leads to resilience, or there are multiple constructs within that?
Technology definitely leads to empowerment in certain cases. And you see that I am simply trying to tell that when something becomes a part of your life and the dependence on external agencies is minimized, that is when it becomes a part of the system. And when this internalization of something which is from outside, injected from outside takes place, that adds to the resilience. That is the way I'm trying to define resilience. So yes, that is one kind of relationship. But as you rightly pointed out, it has implications in different ways in terms of the economy as well. So you are making a one-time investment, but there is a financial sustainability after beyond a particular point is something which grows. Uh, it has economic dimensions. Many of the microsolar domes we had given were used for people, especially women folks, to open shops at night. So
Yeah.
they open small workshops for making paper leaf plates from sal leaves, and I mean ecologically viable small solutions. And they worked at night. They were not able to work at night, or rope making. So you see that technology indirectly influences in various ways. Kids were able to read at night. They were not able to read at night. They were using kerosene lamp for reading in many of the places. So these changes did take place.
Yeah.
So the implications are subtle and far-reaching. So we will have to map those. That is very important. That's what I'm trying to tell again and again.
Yeah, and each of those are, points of learning, and and further building the you know. So there is a quick question here, which is about the social and ecological wheels, resilience wheels that you quoted from Adulans, and they are asking those the determinants that you used in each one of them. The social determinants tends to dominate, or if you go back, it looks like the social determinants are much more in number than the ecological determinants. What is the significance of that? Yeah.
You see that the wills that I have put it or referred to, cited over here, are based on the review of literature. So the review of literature tells that obviously when we are looking at social determinants, the scope of activities for the human beings are very wide. That is what we see in the wills. And when we are looking at the ecological component that were taken into consideration, they're relatively less. That doesn't necessarily, but you see that what doesn't happen over there is the connectivity between the social determinants and the ecological. The ecological will and the social will have not been connected. That is the effort I'm trying to make. So when you have that, the concept of one being small, one being large goes away. These interrelationships and the way they affect one another become much more significant than just the size of the fields. So that is
Yeah, I know.
what I
Yeah.
just wanted.
I think that's a really a good way to look at it, because the integration of the social and the ecological, dismantles the boundaries between the determinants, and therefore they all become social ecological determinants rather than just
Yes.
social or ecological determinants. That's great. We don't have any more questions, Priyadarshi, at this point in time. I know, we may have a 5 minutes left or something, but with your permission, and I would like to bring it, to a close.
Thank you.
Of course, this recordings of the talk is going to be available on YouTube, so there is probably going to be some discussion on that forum, going forward. But again, on behalf of B2B and all of us, so thank you very much. This is
Thank you.
wonderful. And I know this kind of, thoughts and insights and, continues to be discussed. And of course, we have a forum in terms of the Information System Working Group, which you co-lead with Simran Singh, will have much more to kind of say and take it forward. So we look forward to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once again, and thank you
Thank
to
you
the
to everyone.
audience who have joined and
Thanks.
asked.
Thanks to
Some
everybody.
of them asked really wonderful questions, and we invite you to our next month's talk on the last Friday, and we will be announcing all the details of the speaker and the topic and other information in the coming weeks. So
Thank
stay tuned to that. Thank you. Thanks very
thank
much,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah. Bye-bye.